Every door they closed on you was God protecting you from a trap. They thought they were shutting you out, thought they were the gatekeepers of your future, thought their approval was the ticket you needed to move forward, thought their rejection would leave you standing outside forever, watching them build a life you would never get to touch. But they weren't shutting you out. They were being used. They didn't know it, but every door they slammed in your face was a door heaven had already marked for closure. Every no they delivered was a no God had already signed off on. Every seat they refused to save for you was a seat God had already decided would never hold your weight. Because on the other side of that door was not the blessing you thought you were missing. On the other side of that door was a trap, a snare disguised as an opportunity, a ceiling disguised as a promotion, a grave disguised as a group. And every time you cried because they wouldn't let you in, God was quietly relieved that you were still standing outside. Because being outside a trap is not rejection. Being outside a trap is deliverance. You've been through a season where every door you knocked on felt like it was made of concrete. You've been through months where the room you wanted to be invited into stayed closed to you, no matter how kind, how qualified, how patient you were. You've been through years where you watched other people walk into places you couldn't even peek into. You've been through nights where you sat in your car in a parking lot outside a building you were supposed to be inside, staring at the door, wondering what was wrong with you. You started asking yourself the wrong questions. Why don't they like me? What did I do wrong? Why does it feel like everyone else has a key I don't have? Why is my name never on the list? You started shrinking to fit through doors that weren't even meant for you. You started changing your voice, your posture, your opinions, anything to make yourself smaller, more agreeable, easier to invite. You started apologizing for who you were just to earn a seat you didn't even want. And still, nothing. Still, the door wouldn't open. Still, the invitation wouldn't come. Still, the callback wouldn't happen. Still, the yes was withheld. And in that place, in that repeated rejection, you started to believe that maybe you were the problem. Maybe you weren't good enough. Maybe you weren't smart enough. Maybe you weren't polished enough. Maybe the reason the doors kept closing was because there was something about you that didn't deserve to walk through them. Stop that thought right now. You were not the problem. You were the target. And the door wasn't closed because you weren't worthy. The door was closed because on the other side of that door was something that would have poisoned everything God had planned for you. You need to hear this and let it soak into every place in you that still feels rejected. Every single door that closed was a door God was already closing. Every single seat that skipped over you was a seat God had already crossed off your list. Every single friend group that stopped inviting you was a friend group God was already pulling you out of. Every single opportunity that fell through because God intercepted it before it could deliver its actual payload into your life. You thought you were being rejected. You were being redirected. You thought you were being locked out. You were being locked out of a room that was scheduled to collapse. You thought you were being excluded. You were being excluded from a table that was about to be flipped over by the very people setting it. Nothing about your rejection was random. Nothing about the doors closing was accidental. Nothing about your name being left off the list was a mistake. It was orchestration. It was navigation. It was God, quietly, without announcing himself, walking ahead of you and closing doors that would have swallowed you whole if he had let you walk through. That's not what rejection feels like from the outside. Rejection feels personal. Rejection feels final. Rejection feels like a verdict on your value. But God's redirection often disguises itself as human rejection. Because the same door that people close with an attitude, God is closing with intention. And he is not obligated to explain himself to you in the moment. He only asks that you trust him with the exit. Let's talk about the people who did the closing. Because they weren't neutral. They weren't just doing their job. They weren't just following the rules. Many of them enjoyed shutting you out. Many of them looked forward to being the one who got to say no to you. Many of them felt powerful watching your face change when they told you the seat was already taken. You could feel it. Even when they smiled. Even when they said all the right things. Even when they used soft words to deliver hard closures. Something in your spirit knew that the no was not just a no, it was a message. It was a signal that you were not welcome. It was a public statement dressed up as a private decision. They didn't want you in the room because they knew that if you got in the room, the temperature of the room would change. They didn't want you at the table because they knew that if you sat down, the conversation of the table would shift. They didn't want you on the list because they knew that if you were added to the list, the standard of the list would rise. Your presence carried something that threatened the arrangement they had built with each other. So they closed the door, and they told themselves it was about qualifications. They told themselves it was about fit. They told themselves it was about timing, but it was really about control. It was about protecting a version of the room where they got to be the biggest thing in it. And you, walking in, would have made them all suddenly average. That's the truth they wouldn't say out loud. That's the reason behind the reasons they gave you. And God, who sees behind every polite excuse, knew exactly what was happening. But here's the piece they didn't understand. While they were congratulating themselves for keeping you out, God was thanking them for doing his work for him. Because there were doors God was going to have to close anyway. There were rooms God was going to have to pull you out of anyway. There were people God was going to have to separate you from anyway. And they saved him the trouble by doing it themselves. They thought they were punishing you. They were serving God's protection plan. That's the irony of it. When a jealous person, or an insecure person, or a prideful person shuts a door on a covered person, they're not stopping the covered person. They're accelerating the covered person's exit from a season that was already ending. They think they're the reason you can't move forward. They're actually the reason you moved forward faster than you would have if they had welcomed you in. Because if they had welcomed you in, you might have stayed. You might have gotten comfortable. You might have settled for that seat when God had a whole different table waiting for you. You might have accepted their version of your future when God had a version they couldn't even conceive of. Their rejection was your rescue. And there's more. Because behind those closed doors, there were things happening that you would have been dragged into if you had been let in. There were affairs happening at that table. There were financial games happening at that meeting. There were secret alliances forming that were designed to eventually turn on someone. There were versions of a story being built that would need a scapegoat when everything unraveled. And you, the one who kept knocking, the one who kept praying to be let in, you would have been the perfect target. You would have been the newest one at the table. You would have been the least protected. You would have been the easiest to blame when the arrangement finally exposed itself. You would have been the one whose reputation absorbed the fallout for choices you didn't even make. And God said no, not to you, to that. He wasn't rejecting you. He was ejecting a version of your future that would have destroyed you. He was preemptively removing you from a scandal you couldn't have seen coming. He was pulling you out of a room before the room even had a chance to break your life open. Some of those people you envied, the ones you watched, walk through the doors that closed on you. They are now sitting in the very consequences you thought you were missing out on. Their names are in the paperwork. Their signatures are on the evidence. Their pictures are attached to the collapse. And you, the one who cried in the parking lot because you didn't get invited, you are watching it all unfold from a safe distance you didn't know you were being placed into. That's what God does. He doesn't just move you, he extracts you. He pulls you back before you even know you were leaning too close to something dangerous. And he often uses the very people who don't like you as the hands that push you back to safety. They thought they were closing you out. They were actually walking you into a hallway that only opens into rooms God himself designed for you. Now let me tell you what God was actually doing during all of that. While you were knocking, he was rerouting. While you were begging to be let in, he was closing the deal on a location. While you were crying about the last no, he was signing the paperwork on your next yes. While you were mourning the door, he was opening the corridor. You don't understand the geography of God's plan for your life. The doors you saw were not the only doors that existed. The rooms you envied were not the only rooms that were available. The tables you wanted to sit at were not the only tables being set. There was a whole other floor of the building that you couldn't see from where you were standing. And God was preparing that floor for you while everyone else was preoccupied with keeping you off theirs. That's why God has to close some doors so aggressively. Because if he left them slightly cracked, you would keep trying to push them open. You would keep going back to that room. You would keep applying to that group. You would keep positioning yourself at the edge of that circle, hoping. And God had to make it undeniable. He had to slam it so loud that you finally stopped trying. He had to remove the possibility so completely that you had no choice but to look elsewhere. Because you were never going to see what he had for you as long as you kept staring at what other people had for themselves. And here is a truth that will free you if you let it. God did not close those doors to hurt you. God closed those doors because he is more committed to your destiny than he is to your comfort in the moment. He would rather cause you short-term pain in a closed door than long-term destruction in an open one. He would rather see you cry now than see you unravel later. He would rather withhold the seat now than watch you sit down in a room that would consume you. Because God plays chess. He is looking at moves 3, 5, 10 years ahead. He is looking at conversations you have not had yet. He is looking at meetings that have not been scheduled yet. He is looking at consequences you cannot see from your current position. And he is moving pieces on your behalf with a strategic wisdom that will take you years to fully appreciate. Some of the doors that closed on you at 22 saved your life at 30. Some of the doors that closed on you at 30 saved your marriage at 40. Some of the doors that closed on you last year are going to save something in you that hasn't even been threatened yet. That's how far ahead God is looking. You are going to look back at your life 10 years from now and realize that the greatest gifts God ever gave you did not come wrapped in yes. Some of the greatest gifts God ever gave you came wrapped in no. Some of the greatest gifts God ever gave you were disguised as heartbreak, disguised as rejection, disguised as being overlooked in a season you thought was your season. You are going to thank God for the very doors you cried about. You are going to thank God for the very people who wouldn't let you in. You are going to look at old text messages from friends who ghosted you, and thank God that he removed them before he revealed to you what they were really about. You are going to look at old job offers that fell through and thank God that he kept you from signing a contract that would have chained you to a chapter you couldn't have escaped without damage. And you are going to say the sentence that only mature believers can say without bitterness, God, I see now, I see why. Thank you. That sentence is a milestone. That sentence is a graduation. That sentence marks the moment you finally trust that God's no is not a punishment, it's a filter. Because that's what God's rejection actually is, a filter. He is filtering out everything that would slow you down, pull you off course, weigh you down with regret, or attach you to consequences you would never have chosen for yourself if you had known. And he is doing it door by door, no by no, closed opportunity by closed opportunity. And every single time he closes one that hurts, he is quietly opening one that heals. Every single time he shuts a door in your face, he is unlocking a door behind you that you weren't even facing. Every single time he removes an option from your list, he is adding a better one to a list you haven't seen yet. You just have to trust the geometry. You just have to trust that God doesn't waste a single closure. You just have to trust that a God who fed a nation in the wilderness knows how to route your steps around a trap. You just have to trust that the same God who parted seas so his people could walk through can also close doors so his people don't walk into what would drown them. Rejection, in the hands of God, becomes a form of prophecy. Every no is a preview. Every closed door is a message. Every skipped invitation is a signal. And the message is always the same. Not here, not this, not them. I have somewhere better. Look at who you've become because of every door that closed. You didn't know it at the time, but every rejection was carving something out of you. Every closed door was refining your discernment. Every unanswered application was strengthening your resilience. Every friend group that stopped inviting you was teaching you how to walk into rooms alone with your head high. You are now a person who can read a room the moment you walk in. You are now a person who can feel when a smile is polished and when a smile is real. You are now a person who can tell within 5 minutes if a conversation is genuine or if it's a setup. You are now a person who does not need external validation to know that you belong somewhere. That's what all the closed doors built in you. Discernment. 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 You didn't get discernment from a book. You didn't get discernment from a podcast. You didn't get discernment from a Sunday sermon. You got discernment from walking away from doors you desperately wanted to walk through, and letting the walk away teach you something the walk in would have never taught you. Now you can sense when a person is closing the door on you, not because you're inadequate, but because they're insecure. Now you can sense when a room is loud, not because it's alive, but because it's afraid. Now you can sense when a group is close-knit, not because they love each other, but because they're all hiding the same thing. Now you can sense when an opportunity is real, and when it's a costume for a trap. And here is the beautiful part. The very same people who used to be able to make you feel small no longer have that power over you. Their opinion doesn't land the way it used to. Their exclusion doesn't hurt the way it used to. Their disapproval doesn't rearrange your day the way it used to. Because you've been rejected so many times by the wrong rooms that when it happens now, you barely notice. And when you barely notice, they lose their power. Because the whole point of exclusion was to make you shrink. And the person you've become does not shrink anymore. You've been through so many doors closing that you've learned to keep walking. You've been through so many invitations withheld that you've learned to make your own invitations. You've been through so many tables that wouldn't seat you that you've learned to build your own table. And now the tables you build are attracting people who would have never been at the tables you were begging to join. That's what happens when you stop knocking on doors that don't want to open for you. You free up energy that finally goes into building what God actually wants you to have. And what God actually wants you to have does not look like what those closed rooms offered. It looks better. It looks freer. It looks like a life where you're not performing for a seat you already have. Look at your calendar now. Look at who wants your time now. Look at who is asking you to speak at their event, to lead their meeting, to consult on their project, to join their board, to bless their table. Look at who is quietly asking you for advice, even the ones who used to look down on you. Look at how the very rooms that closed themselves to you are now sending emissaries to try to open a channel. Because a person who has been through many closed doors and did not become bitter is a person the whole world eventually seeks. Bitterness would have poisoned all of this. Bitterness would have made you unusable. Bitterness would have made you unattractive to the very destiny God had been walking you toward the whole time. But you refused to become bitter. And that refusal is why the next season is coming to you, free of the residue that would have contaminated it. You are not the same person who was crying in the parking lot. You are not the same person who kept refreshing the email inbox, waiting for a reply that never came. You are not the same person who felt like the world was moving on without you. You are a person who is now moving in a direction the world can't even track. Because when you finally stop trying to enter the rooms God is trying to save you from, you become someone the rooms of God are honored to receive. And this is important. The people who close the doors on you, they are not going to be able to reproduce the version of you that walks into your next season. They knew a version of you that was still trying. They knew a version of you that was still explaining. They knew a version of you that was still hoping to be chosen. They do not know the version of you that stopped needing to be chosen because you have already been called. Called is bigger than chosen. Called does not depend on human approval. Called does not require anyone else's signature. Called is signed in a place they don't have access to. And you are walking in the called version. The called version does not chase. The called version does not audition. The called version does not perform. The called version simply shows up in the assignment, does the assignment, and leaves the assignment when it's finished, carrying peace out with them the same way they carried it in. That's who you are becoming. That's who you already are, if you'll receive it. You do not need to reapply to any of the rooms you were shut out of. You do not need to reapproach any of the people who dismissed you. You do not need to keep watching to see if they'll finally include you. God has already promoted you to a place where their inclusion is irrelevant. Their invitation would now be a demotion. Let that soak in. You are so far past what they were withholding that if they offered it to you today, you would smile, thank them, and quietly decline. Because you now understand what they were really offering. You now see what was really behind that door. And you are grateful, genuinely, deeply, worship grateful that you never got in. Now let's talk about what's coming. Because when God protects you from a trap, He doesn't just let the trap sit there empty. The trap gets triggered. The trap catches something. And that something is usually the people who were confident they were safer than you. The very ones who thought they were smart enough to sit at that table are now realizing there was a bill attached to the seat. The very ones who felt superior for being included are now discovering that their inclusion came with a signature they didn't fully read. The very ones who watched you get shut out are now feeling the walls of their own room start to close in on them. And you, the outsider, the rejected one, the one who cried alone in your car, you are sitting in a peaceful place, watching from a distance that God Himself established. You need to be prepared for what's about to be exposed. Some of the rooms you were denied entry into are about to be publicly investigated. Some of the projects you weren't allowed to join are about to be publicly dismantled. Some of the friend groups you weren't invited into are about to become public messes that everyone will be talking about. And you will suddenly realize that the very rejection you resented was the very protection that saved your name from being in the middle of the fallout. Every closed door was a firewall. Every rejection was a shield. Every unreturned message was a rope pulled back from the edge of a cliff you didn't know you were walking toward. You need to understand the shape of what you were spared from, because the traps behind those doors were not all the same. Some of those closed doors were hiding relationships that would have taken years off your life. People who would have loved you loudly in public and drained you quietly in private. People who would have made you smaller by inches, so subtly you wouldn't have noticed until you looked in the mirror one day and could not find yourself. Some of those closed doors were hiding financial arrangements dressed as opportunities. A partnership that would have leveraged your name to build something you never actually agreed to build. A deal that would have looked profitable on paper and left you holding legal weight when the paper caught fire. A promise of shared success that was really a private plan to use your credit, your reputation, and your gift, while quietly transferring the risk onto your shoulders alone. Some of those closed doors were hiding communities that would have required you to shrink your gift to keep the peace. Rooms where your growth was a threat. Rooms where your worship was too loud. Rooms where your obedience made everyone else uncomfortable. Rooms where you would have been slowly pressured to become the group's smallest version of yourself just to keep your seat at their table. Some of those closed doors were hiding leaders who would have used you. Mentors who wanted your output but not your future. Bosses who wanted your loyalty but not your development. Ministry leaders who wanted your labor but not your voice. People who would have called you family in the meeting and treated you like staff in the hallway. And God, seeing every one of them, quietly bolted the door before your hand ever touched the handle. You do not know how many versions of your ruin never happened because God said no through people who thought they were saying no on their own initiative. You do not know the names you were spared from wearing. You do not know the reputations you were spared from carrying. You do not know the wounds you were spared from healing. You just get to walk in the corridor, not in the trap, and here is what will happen. Some of the people who closed doors on you will lose everything they were trying to protect by keeping you out. They will lose the seat, they will lose the reputation, they will lose the relationships, they will lose the platform. Because the very thing they were trying to preserve by excluding you is going to be the thing that unravels around them. Meanwhile, you will still be standing, not thriving out of revenge, just thriving because your foundation was never built on their approval to begin with. Your foundation was built during the seasons they weren't inviting you. Your foundation was built during the nights you spent alone with God. Your foundation was built during the mornings you got up and worshiped, even though you had no invitation to attend anywhere. That foundation cannot be shaken. And the visible piece you're standing on now is going to become an offense to the people who once thought they were more anchored than you. Some of them will realize what happened and repent to God quietly. They'll come to God and say, I closed a door on someone you were protecting, and I now see it. Forgive me. And God will forgive them, because that's who God is. And you may never hear about that conversation, but heaven will register it. Others will not repent. Others will double down and try to reinvent themselves in a new room, with new people, closing new doors on new outsiders. And that pattern will follow them for the rest of their lives, because the same spirit that closed a door on you will keep closing doors on people until it consumes the person carrying it. But your job is not to track their outcome. Your job is to stay in your peace. Your job is to keep walking through the doors God Himself is opening. Your job is to keep taking the seats God Himself is pulling out for you. Your job is to keep saying yes to the invitations that carry the fragrance of God's fingerprints, and to notice, without pride, that these invitations are coming faster now than they ever came before. Because when God has cleared the wrong doors, the right doors start opening in rapid succession. It's almost embarrassing. You'll get a call from a person you didn't expect, then another call from a place you didn't apply to, then another opportunity from a source you didn't cultivate. Then a stranger will hand you a card in a coffee shop. Then someone from a different city will reach out because they heard your name in a room you weren't in. And it will all feel too easy. It will all feel almost suspicious after so many years of doors slamming. But this is what it looks like when God finishes closing the wrong ones and starts opening the right ones. You don't have to earn your way through anymore. You don't have to grind through anymore. You don't have to prove yourself through anymore. You just have to walk through what God Himself is unlocking on your behalf. And when you walk through and you sit down in a room you never would have imagined yourself in, you will suddenly understand something. You will understand that every no was a redirect. You will understand that every rejection was a rerouting. You will understand that every closed door was one more turn away from a version of your life that would have wrecked you. And you will worship. Not out of triumph, out of gratitude. The deep kind of gratitude that only people who have been rejected many times ever really get to feel. So take this into your spirit and let it settle. Every door they closed on you was God protecting you from a trap. Not sometimes. Every one. Every single one. The ones you understood and the ones you didn't. The ones from strangers and the ones from family. The ones from coworkers and the ones from people you thought were friends. The ones from years ago and the ones from last week. God was in every closure. God was in every no. God was in every silence that should have been an answer and never became one. You were not being punished. You were being positioned. You were not being forgotten. You were being filtered. You were not being rejected. You were being rescued. The next time a door closes on you, do not panic. Do not spiral. Do not read the closure as a verdict on your value. Whisper this instead: God, if you closed it, I trust you. And if I didn't need it, I release it. And whatever you are steering me toward, I say yes to it in advance. That prayer will change your life. That prayer will unlock the peace that only comes to believers who have finally stopped trying to force what was never meant for them. That prayer is the prayer of someone who understands that God is a better navigator than any door on any wall. And here is the promise you can walk into today. Every door that God closes on your behalf, He replaces with a corridor that leads somewhere better. He does not leave you in the hallway forever. He does not leave you knocking forever. He does not leave you locked out of your own life. He is walking ahead of you. He is closing what needs to close. He is opening what needs to open. He is orchestrating the entrances and exits of your entire life with a wisdom you will not fully appreciate until you look back on it decades from now. So thank Him for the closed doors. Thank Him for the invitations that never came. Thank Him for the seats He never let you sit down in. Thank Him for the friendships He didn't renew. Thank Him for the offers He didn't allow to materialize. Thank Him for the people who wouldn't unlock the door for you and never realized they were being used by the God who was protecting you. Because every door they closed on you was God protecting you from a trap. Every one, without exception, on purpose, for your peace, for your future, for your covenant. Amen. Content: someone is losing sleep over the way they treated you. Number: life lessons. Number: motivational video. English, auto-generated. Download, youtubesubtitles.com. Text: English, auto-generated. They had no idea betraying you would ruin their life. Number: motivational video. Text: everyone knows they lied on you, but God is about to vindicate you. Number: motivation. Number: inspiration. English, auto-generated. Download subtitles.com. Text: God is about to bless you in front of ones who betrayed you. Number: motivation. Number: betrayal. English, auto-generated. Download youtubesubtitles.com. Text: now they know you're not to be played with. Number: motivational video. Number: inspirational speech. English auto-generated. Download YouTube. Subtitles.com. Text TTXT.